Okay, I'm going to introduce now my good friend Patricia. As was said, Patricia has spent 17 years in Thailand, where she started her own ministry. God put it on her heart, and she started a ministry to women and girls and helping them come out of prostitution. And now she's living in Berlin and just can't stop. And she's starting a new work in Berlin. So please welcome Patricia Green.
Patricia Green is having a struggle to stay awake because I'm somewhat jet-lagged, having arrived last night. And it's just this time as my bedtime in Berlin. Anyway, it's really lovely to be here with you, and I just want to tell you a little about how I got involved with the whole issue of trafficking. I went to Thailand in 1988, and early the next year a Thai woman and I, began Rehab Ministries, which was an outreach to the women working in prostitution. There, street prostitution is not allowed, so most of the women working in bars as dancers or waitresses or hostesses. And one of my friends that I had made, at this time we had a little sort of a Bible study. Depends who I'm talking to, whether I say it was a Bible study or a support group. We used to invite the women to have a meal with us in a restaurant in the bar area, Patpong. It's an internationally known, notorious area, and we used to invite them on a Saturday afternoon, buy them dinner. For some it was the only decent meal they had in a week, and we'd tell them a little Bible story and pray for them. And we had some amazing things happened, and sometimes girls would ask us to pray for very difficult things, such as, will you pray that I get a good customer tonight? So how would you handle that? But anyway, this particular friend of mine, her name was Nong. She was a very beautiful girl. She was 26. Husband had walked out on her. She had 2 children who lived with her parents up in the village in the north of Thailand. As many of the women do, they come to the city to work to support their families. And this particular day she came and told us that she was going to have to go to Japan. And we said, why? You know, what's happened? And she said her parents had already, because she didn't want to go, and her parents had already signed the contract with a broker who had come to the village. Because they were so desperate, they were in debt, they had to, they were in debt to the bank, and if they didn't pay this money by the end of the month, then the bank would come and take their land, would take their buffalo, which is a very prized possession. You know, it's like your tractor and everything else for your land, and take their house. And of course Nong was their only saleable possession, and so they had signed a contract for her to go to Japan. Now she was a dancer in a bar, she was working in prostitution, but there's a bit different to working in prostitution in your home country than going to another country. We tried everything. We cajoled, we wept, we cried, we pleaded, we begged, we did everything, but there was nothing we could do because the contract was signed. And so she was dressed up, wearing a lot of jewellery, very beautiful jewellery, and her story that she was trained to say was that her grandfather was a very wealthy man and he was dying in Japan, and so she was going to visit him. And so of course she didn't just get on a plane in Don Mueang Airport and fly into Tokyo. She was taken by bus to the Malaysian border, and then she was shipped to Singapore. They changed ships, fishing vessels, and then they went on another ship to somewhere else, and finally they flew, I think, from Taiwan into Japan. Nong had never been to school, she couldn't read, she couldn't write, but we said to her, please phone us if ever you can. And so after about 6 months, one day my phone rang, and it was Nong. And I said, where are you, how are you? You know, everything, sort of wanting to know everything all at once. And she said, I don't know where I am because we keep moving. We're just in a house, 3 women and a mama son. It's a woman who looks after them. And we're here for 3 weeks, we're there for 3 weeks, we're somewhere else for 3 weeks, because we're always running from the police. And I said, are you near a big city? I don't know. Have you ever heard anybody say the name of a city? No. and they just moved all around the country. And at that time there was something like 1,000 Thai women in Japan who were in that same situation. We heard from her 2 or 3 times and we never heard again. We don't know whether she's still alive or whether she died. Many of these women in Japan are starved to death. And there have been some terrible stories about some who've murdered their mama-sons and of course have then just been left in prison for many, many years. And so that's just one face of trafficking. And that was really my introduction to this whole situation. And so I began to find that as I began to work with these women in prostitution, many of them were internally trafficked from the village. The mama's son would go from the bar to a village and say, "Oh, I've got jobs for 10 girls." And she'd usually be a nice lady, very plausible, and everybody would like her, and, you know, "Oh, this would be wonderful," they'd say to their daughters, and go, because everybody wanted to come to the city to work. And of course the work was prostitution. They thought they might be going to school, or they might be working in a restaurant. We had 2 girls who'd been taken to Pattaya, and one was 14, the other 16, and they had been told they were going to work in a restaurant, and they kept saying, "When do we go to the restaurant? When do we go to the restaurant?" Because of course they were in a bar, and one by one, of course, they were forced by the boss to service clients sexually, and they began to realise. And our outreach team went there once, and these 2 cried out, "Please take us away, please take us away." And so they were brought back to our home in Bangkok, and we sent them to school.